Okay.
Record.
I'm pressing record. Right. Okay. So shall we start by introducing ourselves, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So I can go first. So my name is Lina Džuverović, and I'm a curator and a lecturer at Birkbeck in Arts Policy and Management at University of London. And my involvement with this project has basically been through being one of the curators, which was quite a strange process because it was all done remotely, even before the pandemic. We'll talk about that in a minute. And on a more personal level, my specific interest in Theo's project is that I grew up in Belgrade, and which we will talk about as one of the sites for this project. And my family has gone through a situation like many families in that are talked about in the project, to do with housing crisis. So I feel very personally somehow connected to the project. Theo, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure. I'm Theo Prodromidis. I'm an artist and filmmaker based in Athens, Greece. And I was exhibiting artist at the Soy Federfield Translocal Cooperations that came out of a residency in Belgrade in autumn 2019. And I'm really excited to listen to your questions on the work. And especially, I really like the fact that we, instead of having a multiple scheme, we're having more than 2 people speaking, 3 people. It's much better. So, Elena, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself. I'm Elena Loizidou. I teach at the School of Law at Birkbeck, and kind of my research interests kind of coincide with your project. Although I'm not kind of a property law lawyer, I'm kind of interested in anarchism and activism and the way that possible ways in which we could subvert kind of a neoliberal logic. So when Lina showed me your project, I was kind of excited by what you're doing in Athens, and I'm sort of grateful that Lina asked me to participate as well and have this conversation.
Great. So I will just introduce briefly the sort of background a little bit. So your piece, You Can't Evict a Movement, formed part, as we have already said, of the Translocal Cooperation exhibition at Federfield Gallery in London earlier this year. And just like the majority of cultural initiatives in the first part of this year, 2020, the exhibition was profoundly affected by the COVID-19 crisis. But in this instance, it was even more so than most cultural projects because of the unfortunate timing. And so the exhibition opened on the 12th of March, I believe, which was the week that most people in the UK began to become aware of the severity of the situation with the COVID pandemic. It wasn't technically a pandemic just yet, and to stop going out and to stop attending events. And the opening did go ahead. I didn't attend because I had a cold and I was already panicking. I was already worried about it, so I didn't. I felt terrible guilt, but I didn't. So the opening did go ahead, and I think the exhibition closed the next day. And so it has been a strange situation, strange project to be involved in, from starting with the residency last autumn in Belgrade to the development of the project, which was mostly online with curator meetings and video conferencing, even before we shifted to that way of operating because of the pandemic. We had a digital dinner. I think that was in maybe November or December, where each of the artists presented their work in Athens, Belgrade, and Istanbul, and we were sort of all at Federfield. So that was interesting, but nevertheless quite strange, because usually you're connecting with people directly. And then this brief exhibition for a day or so, and now the project has been moved online, which is what this conversation forms part of. So I wanted Theo to start by asking you how this strange and unusual experience has been for you, and if you could talk about the development of the project and how the residency in Belgrade informed the work that you produced, but also how much you knew about the Belgrade context and the local housing issues before you started.
Right, so thanks for the intro. The exhibition lasted more than a couple of days. I think it closed the next week, and I'm gonna take some things from the exhibition side and then work backwards, I think that the work was already, which is a collaborative piece called An Open Newspaper, and in parentheses, You Can Evict the Movement, which is a collaboration between 5 people. The work was already conceived to operate outside of the gallery. So, so for someone who hasn't seen the work on the website, it's a printed work. It's a sort of a large spreadsheet newspaper consisting of like one spread in a way, and it contains texts. It contains texts by 3 localities from Belgrade, Thessaloniki, and Athens, and updates from these territories on the issue of housing. And the work was conceived to be experienced already outside of the exhibition space, in the sense that, you know, it's a newspaper that you may encounter in the gallery space, but you're invited to pick up and actually, you know, go through it, read it while you're somewhere else, maybe at the bench on Finsbury Park, or at home, or use it as a rain cover when it rains, or, you know, whatever other, or a cat litter sort of, or to use it to, you know, to put in your cat litter box, or whatever other means or other ways you want to use a newspaper. But in that sense, it was made to come in contact with the content of the work already outside of the gallery space, right? So, and now that it's online, you can download it and print it and share it, or whatever else you want to do with the file. It's already on the same logic, or it sort of follows the logic of dissemination outside a space of, let's call it, aesthetic experience of the galleries. So the work was actually developed while the residency and after the residency, in the sense that the work came together remotely again, like by collecting the text from people and designing it here in Athens with a collaborator, and then sent over to in London for printing. So in a way, it already existed beyond the it was created beyond one locality. But of course, it was triggered and initiated in Belgrade during the residency, to which I went to with a very different project in mind, to be honest. That of course started.
What was that, just out of interest? Was that something about housing also, or no?
It's a series of works that I'm doing based on anti-fascist poems and anti-fascist songs that become popular. So the original research was on that. I went with this in mind. I started visiting various places. It was my third time in Belgrade. So it was not my first time, but it was the only time that I stayed for that long. And then I started looking at other things. And actually, it was on the night of my birthday that I met someone who introduced me to the housing, introduced me to the actions of the Roof, which is a broad coalition of individuals and collectives fighting, struggling, fighting, demanding a different approach to securing housing, and sort of resisting or trying to assist people who are falling victim to a system of evictions in regards to housing. So it was actually through social interaction that I came in contact, and I got to know of the situation in Serbia, and of course what triggered me to start engage with that was already a knowledge of what was happening in Greece in the last decade. After this decade of crisis here, the issue of evictions and housing became even more urgent. Even though up until this moment that we speak, there's still some frameworks that protect quite a big parts of let's call primer housing, which is actually been extended 2 or 3 times now due to current situation. However, there is a pressure to start cleaning, let's say, the banking sector from bad loans, and thus putting a lot of houses up for putting a lot of people in a possibility to be evicted from their houses. So I initially responded to that coming from a place that this was, I knew that it was becoming a major issue. And I wanted to understand and realize what's going on in Belgrade. So I joined some of the actions of the Roof, and I visited, I was there physically putting my body along with other bodies on the line of, being in front of houses that faced eviction, meeting some families, getting to know the situation. It felt I felt that like home, like I do in many ways about Belgrade, but even, celebrating with Rakia in the morning, the temporary win, of managing to keep the victors out. I felt very close, and I felt quite at home, and it was in a period while I was doing the residency that a lot of things were taking place back in Athens, and I felt I was missing, that I was away from my people and some of the things that I'm involved with in Athens. So I think this also became a way for me to belong somewhere and to feel that I'm contributing to something, I'm learning something. Maybe because I was a little bit homesick, even quickly, because of how severe the news were coming from Greece, and specifically there were a lot of refugee housing squads that were being evicted from last August onwards. So while I was in Belgrade, I was following the news of a lot of comrades and people that were facing this crackdown on the refugee housing. So this is pretty much the timeline. So I met the people, and I started to have discussions, and then I was thinking, okay, so how can we come together and do something together and join some of the knowledge and join some of maybe the toolkits, and bring the people from Belgrade and Thessaloniki, where my hometown is, and Athens, into a conversation and into knowing each other. Of course, some of the people already knew each other because they're in coalitions, European coalitions, the European Coalition for Housing. So we decided to make something which can be disseminated, that we can work together, and we decided on the newspaper, and the rest will be in front of your eyes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good background and overview. So I just very briefly, before talking more about the actual content and the events that you described in the newspaper, I just wanted to ask how the various collaborators, because it's obviously a very complex and multifaceted project, how the worlds of activism and contemporary art with their different lenses sort of come together, and how some of your collaborators and also people that are affected by the situation see your position and the kind of position of, you're coming from a contemporary art context. How do the various collaborators see that?
Well, for example, Anna, who is writing the text, who's co-writing the text from Belgrade, is an art historian. Tonya is an architect. Theodoris is a researcher. I mean, I'm gonna revise your question, because I don't really think that there is, I mean, people from different milieus enter citizen-led movements, okay? And the backgrounds might, the background of someone or the professional activity of someone might offer to these movements tools from each person's expertise. Could be a lawyer that can offer, legal tools to the movement. An artist can offer, a musician can offer aesthetic tools to the movement. So I think it's about bringing your own personal toolkit and sort of joining it together with other people, and trying to see what this instinct and this set of beliefs that you have that bring you together how you can also bring together your abilities, right? So if you're noticing me, I'm gonna avoid using the term activism, because I think in citizen-led movements, there's many more multiplicities than just the singularity of the figure of the activist. But however, there are many activists in this, and this is a term that each one of us can choose to use or not. But I think, you know, we all come in there as citizens rather than activists. I think this is the primer sort of quality or the primer position that we enter a struggle for something. You know, it could be many different things that people become motivated to try to protect, to try to engage with, to try to create a more just situation for it, to create a more just society. So I think it is citizens. In that sense, art, as any other sphere, becomes part of that, you know, field, part of that background. However, if you're asking me on how, you know, I mean, how art operates in this, I mean, art was always you know, a tool of representation, a tool of witnessing, a tool of depicting, you know, and in that sense, I think that, let's say that the sort of people from movements really understand the usefulness of art, or of artists in that sense, of bringing these qualities of depicting, of positioning, of, you know, representing, and vice versa, because what other thing will art represent if not society itself, you know? So I definitely don't see anything antagonistic, because there's nothing antagonistic between a citizen and a field of profession. You know, it's just they're part of the same dynamics, right? So they just manifest in different ways, and, you know, one is a professional field, the other is a social field.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, but I try to. I mean, of course, there's a lot of instances where institutions, if we talk about art, try to engage with movements. There's all sorts of different dynamics. Some great examples, some bad examples, you know. But I think that's the case with any attempt to bring together different dynamics of a society and trying to have a dialogue, and a productive dialogue on that matter. So, you know, I'm not going to retreat back to, you know, the personalist political, which is, you know, a very serious position of the feminist movement, you know. But I think what we take from history, and art history as well, are strategies. You know, so for example, from the feminist movement, everybody, you know, we are all now trying to really, like, you know, apply strategies of care, you know, care for each other and so on. So I think, you know, what happens in these very, you know, rich and diverse spaces that are citizen movements is that everybody brings their own dynamic, you know, and trying to enrich what is a very difficult struggle, is to struggle for a just society. So I think all the toolboxes and everything that one can bring to the table of the assembly, let's say, it's useful and has to be used and mobilized.
Yeah, great, thank you. Elena, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm kind of mesmerized by your answer. I'm kind of tempted to ask a tangential question, but I'll just.
You can. It's we don't have a very strict script.
I can kind of maybe I could preempt the kind of question by this. I think as I was listening to you, I was thinking, like, yeah, I mean, you know, what you're effectively saying is, to be a citizen, you need to be a political animal, right? In some respects, and kind of these interventions, whether you are whether they're from lawyers or artists or architects, or just, you know, I don't know, somebody working in a shop, are kind of their expression of being actually citizens, and in that respect political, to bring an effect in society. So that's what I was thinking as I was kind of listening to you. You're kind of invoking in some respect, a very Arendtian sort of understanding of citizenship, which sort of brings me to somehow into my question, because I was really really interested to read the stories that you record in the newspaper. And you know, I kind of noticed that both in Athens and Thessaloniki and Belgrade, sort of the tactics that are used by these groups that you guys record down, you know, are similar. You know, they're kind of empowering citizens or empowering people with knowledge about the legal system, about financial world. You're also kind of offering a very effective support and through solidarity, I guess. I think that's kind of very important, and we should not kind of underestimate it. I mean, and you're also kind of doing something very practical. They're doing something practical. They're kind of delaying evictions. So I was kind of really interested, but I also kind of noticed, I didn't know anything about Belgrade and the history there of the anti-eviction movement. I knew about Greece and I knew about Spain and the very successful anti-eviction sort of movement in Spain. So I noticed that, I guess, a couple of the cases that kind of jumped into me in Belgrade, that kind of the history is a little bit different, right? While in Greece is a response, the activism emerges as a response of the kind of austerity measures and the catastrophe that those measures have brought. But in Belgrade is something kind of much more complicated. It's somehow a response to stop this kind of crazy neoliberalism kind of entering in, but also battling with some sort of relics of socialism. And I was thinking, like, here I say, you know, how do you reconcile that? But I was wondering whether you kind of thought about it and whether you'd like us to, you know, like to say a little bit about the differences, I guess, in the movements and their responses.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely not the person to give you an in-depth, you know, analysis of each of the movements. Even though since my return to Athens, I have been much more engaged with the local initiative here in Exarchia, and I have been going to many meetings of the, you know, to the weekly meetings and so on. We did have the mobilization that was cancelled for the 28th of March 2020. That was a European Day for Action for Housing. That unfortunately had to be postponed, and we did like something online and so on. Anyway, even though the history, I mean, from one perspective, yes, indeed, there is. We never had socialism in Greece, for better or for worse. You know, that's a historical position that has split the country for decades, and it's let's say, you know, that the civil war that played out in Greece was the first instance of Cold War, and I mean, you know, if you ask different parts of society, there's very different perspectives of, you know, of course the losers were the losers and the winners were the winners, and in that sense, in Yugoslavia, you had the opposite result in a way. Yeah. And of course, that shaped the dynamic of perception of collectivity, of, you know, collective rights, or what is it, you know, private property and so on. That of course had to be. Now, you know, since the 90s, that I think that sort of everywhere you had a shift of the paradigm of how, you know, the market works in relation to the state. Even though they had very different, let's say, trajectories, I personally think that, you know, being two countries on the edges of the border regime of the European Union, I mean, one may be in, who is invited to come in, and the other, no, so one is in, I'm talking about Greece, who has been threatened to be kicked out, and another one which is out and is sort of flirting to come in. However, you do have two societies who are on the border regime of this institution, and there seems to be a similarity in pressure for different reasons between, you know, Greece in the decade of the 10s and Serbia. There is a pressure to canonize certain parts of society and canonize certain parts of how the market is engaging with that society. So, for example, what was going on in Serbia was under the blessings of the EU, and in the case of Greece right now, there is there is a pressure from the EU to release the red loans, as I call it here in Greece, market in order to cleanse the banking system. So in essence, they're very similar in the pressure and the reasoning behind the reorganization of the law about the protection of housing are very similar. And of course, there are peripheral banking systems. They're not, in the sense that they're not central economies. So the banks themselves have to operate in a very different way than the banking system in the UK, France, Germany, and so on. So there's something about being on the border. There's something about, and there's something about actually Greece. At some point was called, the last socialist capitalist state, in the sense of, all the sort of, not only the cultural approach of people to housing, how important family housing is, and, but also, to policies, post-dictatorship policies that really try to, created a statist economy that protected housing in the sense that, the state was a protector of the family and so on. So we really don't have, we do have two examples that really are quite different from the reality in Central Europe, and definitely different from the reality in the UK that's unique all over the world in terms of how housing is perceived and how land ownership is gone. God bless the Queen. And so in that sense, I don't think that there's so many differences, really. Like, it is the contemporary market of, we saw what happened in the States, what was the aftermath of the housing crisis in the States, of the housing loans in the States. So in that sense, I think, and if you go to the European Coalition for Housing and you look at the arguments, that's why the arguments for the protection of housing are universal, because we are dealing with a human right, the human to determine yourself through your the self-determination of having a house. Right? And I mean, we're actually going now in Greece in a situation where there's 12,000 asylum grantees being threatened for eviction because of the reorganization of a program for asylees. They're really, I mean, the issue of housing is urgent in every locality. I think that one can trace some basic, I think it is the logic of neoliberalism, in the sense that there's complete disregard for protecting the basic, and I don't want to call them basic, but the core values of the society and the core needs of the society.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I think it probably answers my next question. So yeah, send it to Lina.
Yeah, well, my next question is, what should we do? We have 5 minutes and 8 seconds left, says Zoom. Should we reconnect? The only issue is then I think I have to wait for the recording to, process.
I'm okay with time myself. I'm happy to continue this great discussion, so I'm okay with this.
Okay, so in that case, I will end the video.
Okay.
Stop recording. I'm a bit scared now to erase it, but let's stop it. As soon as it's processed it and I've received the video, I will call again, but it might be a few minutes. So I will.
No worries.
I'll send an email with the new.
We're here.
Yeah.
No worries. No worries.
I'm here. So we need to get out now, right?
Well.
I'm leaving you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Right.
Great.
Okay, recording. Right. Okay. So to resume. So I think Elena is going to continue with a couple more questions.
I mean, I think you answered kind of my question around neoliberalism and how it operates in both kind of the context of Serbia and in the context of Greece. Theo. So I'm not going to pursue that kind of question, but I'm kind of interested also because I've been following a lot. I've been following at a particular time of my own research the suicides that were kind of happening in Greece as a response to the austerity, and I'm kind of interested in the way in which the evictees respond to these anti-eviction strategies and to the support of them, and I could imagine in some respects that they might be very happy for the solidarity, but they're full of sort of angst about whether their evictions will be successful completely so they can stay in their homes, and to what extent perhaps this constant delay puts them into more distress. So kind of, I guess the question is something about the relationship between the tactics that all these sort of groups are using and the affective response by the people that are being evicted.
Well, I mean, I will answer something a little bit more general because the reason, I think, a place where a lot of my own personal epithesis, my own personal belief system, let's call it, right, around participatory models and informal models, non-formal models of claiming, you know, what one perceives to be just and fair, and you know, and trying to from these models to create a better society. So a lot of those sets of beliefs have strengthened for me during my participation as a volunteer at the Open School for Immigrants in Piraeus.
Yeah, thank you for the link.
In Kokinia, which is a very, you know, it's a historical neighborhood, the strong anti-fascist history, and migratory background, and, you know, sort of deeply working class neighborhood. And I mean, I think something that happens, I mean, you know, you have to always check your privilege in a way, or check your loss of privilege, right? In contemporary societies, in the sense that we have a total reorganization of how we perceive to be connected in society and how the state responds to that. So in essence, the Open School started in 2005 in order to fill a gap that was becoming very apparent in society of not having language courses for immigrants in order to be able to learn their language and then claim residency and so on. So I think something that is very potent in citizen-led movements and struggles is that they do recognize the gaps, or that some of those gaps might, I mean, one can argue that those gaps will exist because of the way the system is structured. Other might argue that these are gaps created by the system for specific reasons. So, so in a sense, if there is a gap, an enlarging hole in the subject of housing, of the access to housing, of course, it has to do with specific territories and so on. So, you know, housing is very different in Africa than in Europe, for example. That's why I'm talking about checking your privilege. And also, we do assume a privilege of being able to afford a house or be in a house. Yeah, and that's something that really played out during the COVID situation. Yeah, of course, how can we stay in the house if we don't have a house, for example. So it is these dynamics that bring people together, right? So I introduced with the paradox of having a privilege or not having a privilege. Of you have groups of people that come together, even if they're threatened personally, or even if they feel that someone else is threatened, and they go there also for the right, the personal right to not be threatened, but also for the social right of not be threatened, to be evicted. So in that sense, I think that there's a sharing there, Secondly, what is very apparent in Serbia, and it's also happening in Greece, and I think with the recent legislation that has passed, you have the criminalization of solidarity. Already in Serbia, there are fines being given to activists and potential prison sentences for standing in solidarity with the people threatened with eviction. So the threat, the systemic threat to the freedom, to the freedoms, it's almost equal, right? So, you know, even if you stand in solidarity with someone, you can face the wrath of a system that wants to execute this order, right? And in that sense, both the sort of singular liberties, but also the collective liberties are being threatened. So I don't think that, I mean, of course, you know, being threatened now with this paper for your own house puts you in a severely precarious position. But it is through solidarity with this position that those network of people gather around. Okay, so only last week in Athens, in Petralona, an old couple was evicted, and 3 people were arrested for being in solidarity with this old couple and protesting in front of the police. So in a way, if we move back a little bit on the specificity and look at the threat to our rights, we are all in this together. And I think it is this condition that mobilizes people to stand the front, to stand by the side, and try to take a position for something that they feel is a multiple threat.
Absolutely, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I think kind of we all, to use kind of a phrase, we are constituted by each other. So I guess I guess that effectively, I think kind of sort of creates some feeling of not only solidarity but being there for each other, because circumstances might change and alter, and we need each other. And you kind of bring me to the law, because I was kind of really interested. I mean, as I said, I'm a criminal lawyer, so I guess I'm interested in that, and I'm interested also in how law is very vague and ambivalent, and you say it is a tool used by those in power, whether it's the banks or whether it's the politicians, to create divisions in society, and not only create divisions but kind of criminalize people, make us feel like denizens, not citizens, in just because, as you're saying, what these groups are doing, or what you are doing in your work, is trying to make a very important and fundamental point, that we all have a right to a home, and this right to a home is being threatened. Is threatened because of environmental reasons, right? Because the system has already failed this the evictees. So I was kind of interested in two things. One, how kind of activisms can subvert the law. All right, is there kind of a potential? Have you seen in all these actions any ways in which the activism itself subverts the law? But I'm also interested, because I do believe, a little bit different than you, that art has a role to play, not just by merely representing what's happening in society, but I think it does something, and I cannot explain it as a lawyer, although I'm trying to write about it. It does something that opens up the field of imagination, so people are not afraid anymore of actually standing against the law, and I think art plays that role, to my mind. So I wanted to hear a little bit your thoughts about that.
Sure. So just take from the last point, of course, creative processes and their outcomes do reverberate in a very different way, from other objects, yeah? And if one follows the logic that Jacques Raschier very eloquently describes in the partition of the sensible, art can create that space, where, and if I go back to one of my favorite writers and thinkers, Cornelius Castoriadis, that does create side is radical potential. Okay, so in that sense, the radical potential of the singularity relies on the triggering of the radical imagination. So to again engage with Castoriadis and talk about autonomy, which I'm going to take your first position and try to put it in the space of autonomy. That, in Greek has a very specific meaning, which is to be self-governed, okay? But then I think especially Castoriadis has contributed to our expanded understanding of autonomy. And there's something in Castoriadis that always sort of moves me a lot is a paradox he presents. So he said something along the lines that an autonomous collectivity creates autonomous individuals and vice versa. And so autonomous individuals create an autonomous collectivity, and that there is a paradox there. Okay, and it is in this paradox that we're in the crisis of this paradox that a lot of citizen-led movements and a lot of attempts, some formal attempts to reorganize citizenship, to reorganize societal dynamics, do face this problematic of what's going on there between the collectivity and the individual. And I think there is a solution in thinking about autonomy in the sense that, this can mobilize a new approach and an understanding of how a society is organized and how it is governed. Okay, because in a way, law is about governance, right?
Yeah.
This is
about organizing life. Yeah.
Its main application, and I think I'm going to be the one who argues for the benefit of fluidity. Unfortunately, fluidity is actually only being served, as RuPaul will say, to the systemic, to the classes of the status quo, and is underserved, to anyone else. So, whereas law is fluid for some classes, for certain parts of society, for others, it's actually very strict and very punishing. So in that sense, we ought to look at autonomy again through the means of education and radical pedagogy. Yeah? And we do need to reapproach, for me, the notion of autonomy after experiences of many decades of how we can claim the formation of our own system of governance. Okay, so in that sense, I hope that art can contribute to that because it does carry some of those tools, and it is able to set up informal institutions in a sense. And just to finish off there, I think there's something that we do, and a lot of artists and other cultural activists and movements we are now in a process where we do feel that we can approach law in a different way, and it is being used in many cases from an environmental movement. So we do feel now in a position, maybe in a very severe position, to really reapproach law and to instigate inside us the potential to assign law, to assign through our own formations, For example, why should the state decide who is a citizen where I can constitute society's terms for accepting my fellow citizen? For, I can assign this, right? I can assign studentship, I can assign fellowship, I can assign citizenship.
Absolutely. Especially, just a little sort of, especially at times when actually the state doesn't really exist. It's a performance of the state, and we're kind of living the effects. Of course, I think, your work or the work of, or what would you describe here, the relationship between collective individual autonomy through Castoriadis going back and forwards, provides us kind of that potential of recreating, I think, the terrain of what it means to be in the world now, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
And I did hope, like, you know, through, I think that the work with this, I mean, the work that has become now the excuse for us to discuss all this, it is a small attempt, it's a small attempt, you know, from a group of people to even say, well, you know, we can issue newspaper, we can circulate the text in our own means, you know, we can try to you know, introduce things, you know, so I think in this very long and what seems as a very demanding process, there's, you know, infinite small steps and small positions that one has to take in order to allow the multiplicity to take space.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. And, you know, it kind of remind me a little bit of the less sort of minor projects, you know, like that they come there and disrupt and create a different island than the one that they're forcing us to build. Thank you.
Thank you. That's, yeah, it's very, very interesting. And it's also, I have to say, from my perspective, I'm quite cynical about the possibilities of art reaching beyond its own confines. And it's refreshing, and also it's quite, I guess, makes me feel a little bit more positive about it, hearing you talk about it with conviction, because I'm a little bit on the side of maybe being a bit disillusioned.
Can I support this? Can I support this by saying that while producing this process, I never thought of making a work, an artwork in that sense. But I think that also, you know, my prime objective was to get the people together, share some of my production funds with them as a writer's fee, you know, sustain this relationship, take care of this relationship, and try to find a form that can approximate a caring come together, you know. And but however, after installing this outcome, it did answer a lot of my questions about art, you know, how an artwork can occupy space. And actually, I'm following some of the strategy. It was a very informative process for me. In a piece I'm making now, in a film I'm making now to be shown in autumn, which I'm trying to take some of those tools developed. And so what I'm trying to say is that for me, at the moment where I denied myself, or I stopped myself from worrying about, you know, what is a work of art, it is exactly that moment that helped me approach it again anew, you know. So, but that's why I said in the beginning, you know, what is art's operation in the world, you know, is not. It's a very open question, and one has to constantly engage with, you know, and I think that's extremely important for the reasons I mentioned earlier, that there's an informal process there being developed that can lead to change.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely understand that, and I think you're right to sort of see the various infrastructures that art and the cultural sphere can offer as forms of support structures rather than sort of an end in itself. And I completely support that. I'm just a little bit fatigued by the compromises, by the many compromises, but it's really good to hear that you've kind of gone full circle in a way. So just, I think we've outstayed our welcome on Zoom again. Soon, yeah, soon probably. So I just wanted to maybe close by asking you if you could, two things, talk about whether you are in touch with people in Belgrade, especially in relation to the protest at the moment. Many people have been arrested. There's a lot of people standing in front of the central prison, protesting, asking for the people to be released, and people are being, and some of them are also people who are affiliated with the ROOF group, you know, for standing, for just being there, or for holding a banner, you know, very, very basic things, and they have been arrested. So I wonder if you're in touch and if you know what's happening, and also like if there are any support networks. And then just to close with saying what, how the project, if it's continuing, how it's continuing, and kind of where you're at now.
I am trying to be in contact with various sisters and brothers in Belgrade. Indeed, 3 members of ROOF have been arrested for no reason, actually. It's not I mean, in times of intense struggle, sometimes communications outside of the struggle do have to wait, no, for for dealing with a severe situation inside the structure. On the other side, it's not that things in Athens are quiet and peaceful. So actually, also on our side here, it's been a tremendously violent period, violent not only physically but also psychologically. We are trying to be in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Belgrade. I think that, you know, networks do mobilize in times of crisis, and they're trying to help each other. We are facing, however, a period where, you know, we are forced to stay put in many ways. And I think that can be also, as much as it is a curse for having the freedom to go out and convene and gather and claim. It could also be a period where we really look around us. We really do focus on our immediate needs. So you know, I'm trying to be optimistic about severe situations bringing people together. There's nothing to lose anyhow.
But I'll change, yeah.
Nothing to lose, but a house maybe, you know. But you know, still, you know, and I think we're mobilizing everywhere. We're mobilizing to save our earth because our houses won't serve us anything if it's like they're unlivable. I'm in discussion with. I was invited. I'm in discussion to maybe mobilize this project again in a different territory and continuing this exchange. Nothing to be communicated yet, but so there is this invitation that is being discussed of where we can take this. I was supposed to be in Belgrade with Tonya, who wrote for Athens, to meet Anna, who wrote for Belgrade last May. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So these are relationships that hopefully will remain. Yeah. And they are bringing us together, you know. But I cannot say anything about the future. Like, I mean, I'm engaged right now in some trying to develop some new work, and also to continue engaging with structures that we're facing an extraordinary situation of how we're gonna reorganize some things. You know, how do we engage with the people we want to engage? How do we perceive, you know, for example, in terms of art practice, what is an audience, you know, who are we showing the work to and for what reasons? But I think that, you know, we are asked to find new ways. I think those ways could be productive and beneficiary amidst the situation that looks very dark. Unfortunately, you know, as far as the state goes, we are seeing a total takeover of what is perceived welfare or care, and a total collapse of some of the systems. However, on the same time, on this collapse, we are called to re-engage with what we find as to be our core values of how do we take care of each other, how do we take care of the people who care for us, you know, how do we support these caring systems. I think it is a moment, it is a difficult moment, but it's filled with the potential to revisit a lot of things that were not operating for a long time now. And that's obvious in terms of health and education, but also in terms of employment. there are struggles for universal income. There are struggles to revisit how we support our comrades working in healthcare. There are struggles to, again, reinvigorate our education systems. And unfortunately, we are facing some extreme positions coming from the seats of power. And one, has to look at, many examples around us that seem to be very problematic. But we are in discussion, we are struggling, and, just if I need to finish off with this is, in many cases where we ask ourselves, what one would do enter such an action is, the obvious answer is that that I couldn't stand not doing it. I couldn't stand being in a historical moment where I wouldn't do anything about that. So I think this mobilizes people from every spectrum and every field. So I personally am optimistic that we can find the pathogenies of the systems that led us to this moment, and we can at least try to change it. Without losing too many of us.
Yeah.
Without casualties, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Elena, any closing remarks?
No, just it's been a pleasure hearing you talking about your work, Theo, and I'm going to follow it more now that I'm aware of it. Yeah, thank you for the wonderful answers. That's what I.
Yeah, I'm very glad that this constellation of people came together. It's great. It's really good. Okay, well, thank you both. I'm gonna.
I hope we meet somewhere, and we can have a coffee or a drink somewhere all together.
We can drink raki.
Yeah, that would be very
somewhere
good.
Closer to Athens and Belgrade.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be very nice. Oh,
I was also
we dream. Yeah, I'm dying to be in Belgrade right now, but it's just not a possibility. But one day this will all seem like a very strange period when we
a bad nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, hopefully Belgrade or Athens or maybe even boring old London. Anyway, well, thank you both.
Anyhow.
Yeah. Thank you both, and I will send this to Furtherfield and then let you know what happens next. I'm not sure myself.
Great.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.